This video will review the characteristics of convexity for ostomy pouching systems. Convexity is an outward protrusion on the skin side of the barrier. Convexity is used to correct less than ideal stomas and/or less than ideal peristomal planes. Convexity varies between the manufacturers and is somewhat on clinician creativity. Convexity has a variety of properties that should be considered when selecting for your patients. These properties include pre-cut versus cut to fit, integrated versus non-integrated, the amount of tension applied to the peristomal plane, whether it's soft or it's firm, the number of depths or degree of depth, including whether you're using stacking or building convexity on your own. Flat flanges work best when the stoma protrudes well and when the peristomal plane is flat, and remains flat when the position changes, when the patient's either sitting or bending. Convexity helps to correct the imperfections to the stoma when it doesn't protrude well, or the os or opening exits at skin level, or the stoma telescopes. Or it corrects imperfections to the peristomal plane, wrinkles, creases, gullies, or valleys, or it actually does both. Convexity will help a stoma to tip in a different direction, prevent urine or stool from undermining a barrier, or it will distort the peristomal skin folds. We are going to review commonly available convexity, their individual merits and concerns, and it's important to note that there's no universal language for describing or grading convexity. Most descriptors come from clinician experience. We're going to look at whether it's pre-cut or cut to fit or moldable. We're going to look at whether it is integrated or non-integrated. We're going to talk about the amount of tension that's applied to the peristomal plane, and we're going to look at varying depths of the convexity. So as I first started mentioning is that in an ideal circumstance, you're going to have a stoma that sticks out from the skin or it protrudes, and the plane around the stoma is going to be perfectly flat. And you want to ensure that when you actually assess your stoma or assess your patient for whether the stoma protrudes and the peristomal plane is flat, you don't want to do it when they're laying on their back. You actually want to assess it when they're sitting upright, because everybody has a perfect scenario when they're actually laying on their back, but as soon as you sit them upright is that it starts to demonstrate their creases and folds. So in an ideal situation, you have a stoma that protrudes, you have flat peristomal planes, and you can take a flat barrier, there's no protrusion on the back, and apply that over top to achieve your seal. When you have a less than ideal circumstance, I'm going to bring up this as an example, is that you still may have a protruding stoma and the opening or the os is at the center, but now you've got all of these valleys and ridges around it, so that if you're going to take your flat pouching system and apply that over top of it like this, is that you can start to see from the side, from the profile, is that you actually have a gap or a gully, and that's a place for the stool to collect or the urine to collect and actually cause undermining, and that you're not actually protecting all of the surrounding skin. So right away you know that you're going to have to be able to actually compensate for that with some degree of convexity. And that may be when the patient's actually sitting upright, as I mentioned, is that when they're laying flat, when they sit upright, is that it may actually distort even more. And you might start to see that their stoma fold or their skin folds will actually crowd around the stoma, and that their stoma disappears inside of that. So again, with convexity, what we're hoping for is that that's going to open up and that the stoma is going to be able to stick out, and you flatten those peristomal planes a little bit to make the stoma or to make your seal more predictable. So convexity, when you look at the back of it, like this, I've just taken a convex barrier here and cut it in half, is that you can see that there's some degree of protrusion. It's quite different than when you look at the back of a flat flange. And as I said, all of the companies actually make differing degrees or levels of convexity so that you can actually match the right one to what your patient's requirements are. And if we take that example of this, great looking stoma but not so great looking peristomal plane, is that when you actually apply the convexity, you can see as it pushes into the skin is that it's flattened out that plane, and you're now not exposing or seeing the skin, and you're not going to worry about the stool or the urine actually seeping underneath and causing a leak. So that's what convexity does. It's actually going to distort that plane or fill in that plane for you so that you actually have a better seal. All of the companies, actually, as I said, make differing levels of convexity. And you can actually build your own convexity. So probably the very first place that we could start is to actually take a barrier ring and a flat barrier, and this would be considered a low level of convexity. So you would pull your ring out to the size and shape of your stoma. You would put it on the back of your barrier like this, okay? And already, if we go by what the definition is, that it's some degree of protrusion on the back of the barrier, you've achieved a very low level of convexity. So if you had somebody that's got a small little gully like that, you would see whether or not that barrier on the back of that flange is enough to fill that in. And that's probably not enough of a filler. You can actually see a gap there. So you would probably be looking for something that's got a little bit more convexity. But that's a low level. That's an extremely low level of convexity that you can make yourself. Equally, you could take a convex barrier ring, like this one here from Hollister, and you could put that again on the back of the flange. And again, you can see that you've actually made, again, a relatively low level of convexity. You've definitely got some degree of protrusion. And again, you could now take that and see, am I happy with how that's starting to fill in the gaps and creases around that particular stoma? Obviously, too much of a gap, you'd want to make it a little bit smaller there, but you can start to see that you're actually filling in around those creases and gullies a little bit better. Okay, so again, fairly low level, and using a flat plane and actually taking two pieces and putting it together. The next level of convexity would be what we call integrated, where it's actually built into the barrier or the pouching system itself. So this one's from Salts, and this is what we call soft convexity. And as you can tell, is that this has actually got a lot of flexibility to it. You can actually distort it with your hand so that it would actually go into a crease or a gully. With this particular one, is that you could, once you've actually cut it, so we'll just cut an opening in here. Is that once you've cut your opening, and once you take the release liner off, you can actually even appreciate even more just how soft that is. That's very, very flexible. But you can also see is that this doesn't actually have a lot of rigidity. So if you need a lot of tension right where the stoma is, this is not going to be the product for you, because any degree of rigidity is actually way out at the periphery here. Almost, you can sort of see where the plateau starts. So your tension is way out here. Okay, so this would be for somebody who has, again, a very minor dip or gully that you're trying to fill in, or has a small fold that you're wanting to hold open. But if you've got somebody that's got a deep gully, right, like this, where you can't even see the stoma when they're on a profile, is again, you're not going to probably, if you look at the front here, when you open up that pouch, you can see that you've got a big gap right in there, and you're not actually filling it in. So this is not enough convexity for you. Okay. Hollister has two types of convexity. So their first one here would be this one, which is, again, their integrated convexity. But this one, you're going to see quite a bit of a difference between that and what we just first saw with the Salts one. This one's actually got a fair amount more rigidity to it. It's really hard to distort. And when you press on it, you can't, it's not floppy. It's actually not going anywhere. So again, this is going to start to provide you with a, most people would say that this is a medium level of convexity, and it would actually fill in that gully and crease. So you would, with a little bit of tension, you'd be trying to figure out, does that actually distort it enough for me, or am I going to have to require something deeper? And as with the flat, you can take the backing of this off, and you can actually take a ring and you can do what's called stacking, where you're actually going to distort the ring again into the shape and size that you want. And you would put it on the back of the barrier, and you're starting to build up even a little bit more convexity. Okay? As soon as you do that, though, you're adding cost, right? If you think about what the cost of a ring is and the cost of a convex barrier, is that you're starting to make a very expensive system. But if that's what's required to ensure a seal for the patient, then that's what's required. Okay? You have to remember that convex barriers typically add about 50% over the cost of a regular flat barrier. As I said, that there's two options available, and this is their cut to fit convex. So with this one, you would actually, as I said, cut it to the shape or size that you need. And what you would need to take note of, and we'll see if we can actually demonstrate what the difference is here, is that, again, this is somewhat like the soft convexity in that you can see that there's absolutely no rigidity here. You can actually move it back and forth. So your point of tension, where it's going to provide support, is way out at the periphery here. And if you're expecting it to provide tension right at the inner part here, it's not going to be able to do that. As opposed to this one, I'll see if I can actually, I can't get the barrier off on that one, but the tension is actually right where the opening is, okay, on this particular one. Convatec has two options as well, and again, this is their integrated, where it's actually built in. And all of the integrated convexities, when they're built like this, is that they actually have varying sizes based on your needs. So if you look at the product catalogs from the companies, is that I think the smallest one that they start off with is about 1/2 inch in diameter, and the largest one is 2 inches in diameter. This happens to be a 1.5 inch opening. But again, you can see what the rigidity is. This is very, 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 very stiff, and you would not be easily able to distort that when you're putting it over somebody's belly. Okay, and this one's got a fair amount of depth to it. You can see that there's quite a bit of a slope to it, as opposed to this one, which is their moldable version. And this one, you can see there's a slope as well, but you're actually shaping that inner, the barrier. This one you don't cut. This is their moldable. And again, when you take the backing off of it, you're going to see that this one doesn't actually have any rigidity to it. The rigidity is way out at the periphery here, as opposed to this one where the rigidity is right here, right at the opening edge. So you have to, again, consider what it is that you're hoping that your barrier is going to be able to do for you. And lastly, from Coloplast, is that they have two differing depths. They've got their Censura, what they call light convex, and this is their deep convex. And they have them, these are both cut to fit, but they do have them available as a pre-cut sizes as well. And again, when you cut these ones are a little bit different than the other two that are cut to fit, in that when you actually cut into this, it actually keeps its rigidity just a teensy bit more. Maybe not so much with the Censura here, certainly when you use that with the Assura. I'll give that a bit of a cut there. And again, when you're assessing the rigidity and you want to see how firm it is, you should always take the release liner off the back. That gives you a better idea. You've actually got a fair amount of flexibility there as well. So your tension's going to be on the outside and not so much on the inside here on these cut to fit. So if you need to have this dish or this bowl inside of the coupling mechanisms to give you your rigidity, this dish or bowl, then you're probably looking for a pre-cut appliance rather than having these cut to fit ones. And again, I just want to show you some of the things to be aware of, is that if you have somebody like this who I'm going to say has, actually this is a better example, is that if you've got somebody who has a flush stoma like this and you're thinking they need to have a little bit of convexity because of leaks, be careful of the depth that you choose, because as soon as you push onto it, you have to realize that a very firm belly may actually want to push that away and push the barrier off. When you have that gap here, is that that's going to be less of a place for it to actually adhere and hold on to the surrounding peristomal planes. So you may be better in a situation like that to actually try a lower level of convexity. And again, you've still got a bit of a gap, so maybe this is where you're taking your one piece or your flat barrier and adding just a little bit of a ring onto the back, because you've got more flexibility and it's actually going to fill into the gap. If you require more information about convexity, contact Joe or the customer service lines for the major suppliers in Canada.